You didn't lose your job. You didn't change your spending habits. You're not being careless with your money. So why does it feel like, no matter what you do, you're falling a little further behind every single month? The answer isn't in your budget. It's not your discipline. It's not your income. It's your dollar. And in the next 15 minutes, I'm going to show you, clearly, simply, and honestly, exactly what happened to it, where it went, why it happened, and what you can do about it. Let's start with the most important concept in this entire video: purchasing power. It sounds like an economics term, and it is, but the idea is incredibly simple. Purchasing power is not about how many dollars you have, it's about what those dollars can actually buy. Think about it this way: if I gave you $100 in 2020 and sent you to the grocery store, you'd come back with a full cart, a real haul. Meat, produce, snacks, cleaning supplies, the works. Now imagine I give you that same $100 today. Same store, same list. You're pushing a half-empty cart to the register. That's purchasing power loss. And it's not a feeling, it's not a political opinion, it's math. Between 2020 and 2024, cumulative inflation in the United States exceeded 20%. What that means in real terms: if you were earning $50,000 a year in 2020 and your salary didn't increase, you were effectively earning the equivalent of about $40,000 by 2024. The government tracks this using something called the Consumer Price Index, or CPI. Think of it as the government's official ruler for measuring how much prices are changing across the economy. We'll come back to the CPI later, because there are some very important things about it that most people don't know. But first, let's talk about how we got here. There wasn't one single cause of inflation. There were three major forces hitting at the same time that combined into the financial pressure you're feeling right now. Let's go through each one. When COVID hit in 2020, the US government made a decision. To keep the economy from collapsing, they injected over $5 trillion into the financial system. Stimulus checks, business loans, enhanced unemployment, Federal Reserve bond purchases, the list goes on. Now, was some of that necessary? Many economists would say yes. But here's the consequence that nobody explained clearly enough at the time. Imagine an economy like a pizza with 8 slices, and there are 8 people eating. Everyone gets one slice, that's the balance. Now imagine the government prints money, and suddenly there are 12 people at the table. But there's still only 8 slices of pizza. What happens to the price of each slice? It goes up, because now more money is chasing the same amount of goods. That's inflation in its most basic form. And that's exactly what happened. At the same time the government was pumping money into the system, COVID was destroying the supply side of the economy. Factories in Asia shut down, shipping ports backed up, trucking networks got stretched, raw materials ran short. Less stuff being produced, more money in people's pockets to spend on that stuff. You can do the math. Here's one example that tells the whole story. Used car prices, used cars, not new, rose by over 40% in 2021 alone. Not because people suddenly wanted used cars more, but because new car production stalled due to a global semiconductor shortage, and people had no other option. When supply shrinks and demand holds steady or rises, prices go up. Every time. The third engine, and this one affects everything, is energy. Here's something most people don't fully appreciate. Energy isn't just what you pump into your car. Energy is what gets food from the farm to the store. It's what keeps the lights on in the warehouse. It's what powers the truck that delivers your package. It's baked into the cost of virtually every product you buy. When gas prices spike, and they did significantly between 2021 and 2022, the entire cost structure of the economy shifts upward. It's like a rising tide that lifts all prices. Groceries go up, goods go up, services go up, your whole cost of living goes up. So you had all three of these happening simultaneously. More money in circulation, less supply of goods, higher energy costs driving up everything else. That's the recipe for what you've been living through. Let's get specific, because this isn't abstract. You feel this in 4 places more than anywhere else. According to USDA data, food at home prices, that's groceries, not restaurants, rose by more than 25% between 2020 and 2024. Eggs, bread, beef, milk, butter, the everyday staples that fill your cart every week, all of them cost significantly more. And here's what makes it especially painful. These aren't luxury items. You can't opt out of buying food, which means there's no escape from this particular price increase. You absorb it every single week. Median rent across the United States rose by approximately 30% nationally since 2020. In major metros, the increases were far higher. But the housing story gets even more difficult for people trying to buy. In 2020, the monthly mortgage payment on a median-priced American home was roughly $1,000 to $1,200 a month. By 2023 and 2024, with higher home prices and higher interest rates, that same type of home was costing over $2,000 a month in mortgage payments. Nearly double, in 4 years. For a generation already struggling to build wealth, this has effectively locked millions of Americans out of home ownership. Not because they're irresponsible, but because the math stopped working. Healthcare costs were already rising before inflation accelerated, but the last 4 years added significant press. The cruelest part? For millions of Americans, you're paying more for coverage that covers less. The deductibles went up, the co-pays went up, the coverage stayed the same or shrank. We talked about used car prices earlier, but the car story didn't end there. Car insurance rates across the United States rose by approximately 50% in many states between 2021 and 2024. Why? Higher car values mean higher replacement costs. Higher repair costs, driven by parts shortages and labor inflation, drove premiums up further. For a lot of families, the car insurance bill is now one of the biggest fixed expenses in the monthly budget. And unlike a lot of expenses, you legally can't drop it. Groceries, rent, healthcare, insurance, these aren't the things you splurge on, these are the basics. And the basics are what got expensive. Now, here's where things get interesting, and a little uncomfortable. Because if you've ever looked at the official government inflation numbers and thought, this doesn't match what I'm actually experiencing, you're not wrong. Let me explain why. The Consumer Price Index, the government's official inflation measure, does capture real price changes. But the way it's constructed creates some significant gaps between what it reports and what you actually pay. Here are 3 of the most important ones. The CPI doesn't use actual rent prices or actual home prices to measure housing costs. Instead, it uses something called owner's equivalent rent, a survey-based estimate of what homeowners think they could rent their home for. This measure is slower to react to real market changes, which means when rents spike fast, as they did, the CPI housing component lags behind reality. The index looks tamer than your actual rent bill. The CPI is also designed with what's called a substitution assumption. The idea is, if steak gets too expensive, consumers will substitute chicken, so the index adjusts. Here's the problem with that logic. When the government adjusts for substitution, it's essentially saying, you adapted, so we won't count that as inflation. But your budget still absorbed the trade down. You're eating less of what you wanted. That's a real cost. It just doesn't show up in the official number. Wages did rise between 2021 and 2023. The headlines celebrated it. But when you adjust for actual inflation, real wages, meaning what your paycheck can actually buy, were negative for most of that period. Read that again. You might have gotten a raise, but in terms of purchasing power, the raise didn't keep up. You were, in real terms, making less than you were before. That's not a political statement, that's arithmetic. All right, we've diagnosed the problem clearly. Now let's talk about what you can actually do. Because knowledge without action is just frustration. And I don't make these videos to frustrate you, I make them to give you an edge. Here are the 3 most important moves for protecting your purchasing power going forward. Cash in a savings account earning 1 or 2%, while inflation runs at 4, 5 or 6%, is a guaranteed loss of purchasing power. Every year, quietly. This doesn't mean you don't keep cash. You absolutely should maintain an emergency fund. But beyond that emergency fund, your savings need to be working harder than inflation. 2 options worth researching. I-bonds, US Treasury savings bonds that are directly tied to inflation. When inflation goes up, the interest rate goes up. They're one of the few savings tools actually designed to protect purchasing power. Tips: Treasury inflation protected securities. Similar concept, available through brokerage accounts. Historically, real estate, commodities, and certain physical assets have been strong hedges against inflation. They tend to hold their value or increase as the dollar loses purchasing power. This doesn't mean everyone needs to rush out and buy a house or gold bars, but it does mean that building wealth in assets that aren't purely dollar-denominated is a smart, long-term strategy. Owning something real, something with intrinsic value. That's the principle. The most inflation-proof asset you have is your ability to earn. Skills that are in demand, regardless of economic conditions, are worth more than almost any investment. A specialized skill, a profitable side business, a second income stream, these are things inflation cannot erode. If your income doesn't keep pace with inflation, your standard of living falls. Period. So the most aggressive thing you can do is invest aggressively in what you can produce and earn. Finally, stop budgeting based on the official 3% CPI number. Your real cost of living, groceries, rent, insurance, healthcare, is rising faster than that for most Americans. Build your budget around what you're actually paying. Track your real expenses. Build in a real inflation buffer. Don't let the official number lull you into a false sense of security. Understanding this is itself an advantage. Most people don't. You now do. Your dollar didn't just silently lose its value by accident. It happened through a series of decisions, policy choices, economic shocks, and structural realities, most of which were made far from your kitchen table. But here's what matters. You now understand what happened. You understand the mechanics. You know where the pressure is coming from. And you know the moves that can protect you. That understanding, that clarity, is not something most people have. And in a world where financial decisions compound over years and decades, knowing is an enormous advantage. If this gave you something real, subscribe. Because next week, we're going deeper. Is inflation actually over? Or are we in the eye of the storm? Because the Fed says it's under control, but the prices at your grocery store tell a different story. And I think you deserve to know which one is actually true. I'll see you in the next one.